What's up? This is Jordan Robinson. You're listening to the Bleach Brothers podcast. Be sure to pay attention to B words of wisdom and whatever it is that fumbles out of Jake's lips.
Welcome into the Bleach Brothers podcast. This is B-Word, and I am here with my childhood buddy, Jake the Hater, my cartoon pal, my Saturday morning companion, my bowl of cereal stealer. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Did you know I didn't get to watch Saturday morning cartoons?
I did know that. We've had this discussion, but I don't know that we've had this discussion on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not because I wasn't allowed. It was because I was always in sports. I was an athlete, right? And you always played. And I remember one time I bitched to my mom, and I was like, all I want to do is sleep in and eat some, like, whatever cereal. Like, I was a big fan of Golden Grams or Honeycomb,
Okay.
and just watch all the cartoons all day. And she goes, no, you're not going to be lazy and sit around. If you're going to be home and not go to baseball or whatever, you could do chores. So even if I did get to stay home, B-word, I did chores. So cartoons for me were always the after school cartoons. Remember, like, Fox Kids had the little block right when you get home, like between 2 and 4 or whatever.
Something like that, yeah.
That's where I got most of my cartoon fix in.
See, I think after school, so I was able to watch Saturday morning cartoons to a certain extent. I mean, obviously it wasn't a lot, but my mom was actually a fan of certain cartoons, or at least that's how she made it seem when I was growing up. And so I kind of appreciated that because she would share some of those things with me, especially the cartoons that she grew up with. But, after school, I primarily watched things like Saved by the Bell or, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or, things more live action. But that's kind of the story between us, right? Because you still like cartoons, you still like anime to a certain extent. And I'm more of a realist. I like things that are live action. I like, real women and not, drawn women.
Lola Bunny.
Yeah, pretty much. So we there's no hiding this episode. We came to the table and we decided we wanted to do something. We ended up deciding that we wanted to do a little March Madness bracket, but what did we want to do it on? And there's a lot of things out there that we could have done it on. We could have done it actually on all the teams if we wanted to and ran a sports show, but somehow you and I started talking about cartoons, and then the light bulb went off and we said, hey, we should actually try to figure out what the best cartoons are, right?
Yeah, I think because, we could have done sports. We know that. And we would have covered that well. The other thing was originally we were going to do with the Everlasting Bookshelf. We were going to do book authors versus like movie writers. And then we went, okay, it just got really convoluted. Like, we were drawing up a bracket, and then it was like leaning like, okay, like, where does Stephen King rank, and la da da da. And then I think we finally settled on cartoons, which made sense because we love them. There's the nostalgic factor. But also we knew it would be a very tight competition because there's a lot.
There's a lot
to
of
like
good cartoons.
Cover of like what you like and like what has stood the test of time, like, for example, one of them on the bracket, like Looney Tunes, you look at them, they're like a Duke, right? They've been around forever. They're, one of the best ones in the game. So it was a lot of fun. And we did enjoy that we did include the fans, the Salty Hippo Nation, in this as well.
We did. And so behind the scenes, we basically came to the table and we said, okay, how do we do north, south, east, and west on our bracket? Right. And so I had the idea that let's do decades. And so we did 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. And basically each one of us came up with a list of 8 cartoons within that decade. And we had some mild debate on should these be considered, should these not be considered. But the ones that we settled on are for the 1970s, we had Fat Albert against Scooby-Doo. We had Looney Tunes against Tom and Jerry. We had the Jetsons against the Flintstones. And we had Schoolhouse Rock against Pink Panther. So staying in this decade, I think that this was the hardest decade for me to choose cartoons from.
Really?
Yeah, because there wasn't so many that like I watched when I was a kid. Like the only one on my list that didn't make it was Popeye.
See, in Popeye, I couldn't because it depends on which decade in Popeye you're talking about. Like black and white Popeye is better than color Popeye.
I like
So,
black and white Popeye, but that was
yeah, but
early
that's the
70s
50s.
Popeye.
That's 50s and 60s.
Well, I guess
70s is color.
I guess you're probably right because, yeah, I was thinking 50s Popeye or black and white Popeye. So maybe I was in the wrong decade. But Popeye was one of those ones that I wanted to include in the 70s, but that actually didn't make my list. What did you have in the 70s that didn't make your list?
I'm not a big fan of that whole decade in general. Hippies suck. And I know there's 60s, but they trickle into it. Because like when you came up with the 70s, I was like, thank God, because I mean, you picked all I did was look at the big hitters. Like I love Tom and Jerry, right? I liked the Flintstones. I liked the Jetsons. I watched Schoolhouse Rock in school. But for me, honestly, Pink Panther was probably the best one out of that whole group for me growing up. Because I used to watch that. I would watch that. Just like I said, after school, I was always that kid that woke up super early too and would watch the cartoons before school too.
Right.
And before school, you always saw the ones that your parents might watch with you. You know what I mean? So
Right.
like there was a lot more 70s cartoons in the morning, or you got the bad ones like Sonic the Hedgehog or whatever. Right. But I love Pink Panther. And then Looney Tunes. But there wasn't really one that didn't make my list because I will say when you sent me yours, you sent it first. I was like, thank God you led the way because I could give a shit about this fucking decade. And I just picked like, okay, yeah, I know that one. I know they're from that genre. And that was it. I don't think I sent you one that was different than yours. Like I've never seen Fat Albert in my life. I hate Scooby-Doo. I hate
Really?
that fucking dog. It's the same fucking cartoon over and over again. Like, oh, Jinkies at the end. Like, great.
That's what cartoons are, bro. It's all the same.
They are not. No, they are not. This is why I like anime. Dragon Ball Z continues on, right? The Simpsons have stories.
Ranking anime, douchebag. Okay,
but the whole point is Scooby-Doo is the same damn thing every time. All they do is they change the monster and where they're at. They rip a mask off. It's a cranky old white dude that they busted. That's the whole damn cartoon. The only Scooby-Doo that's good is called Mystery Inc. And it was made almost like in the anime style that was older by Cartoon Network, I think in the early 2000s. That's the only Scooby-Doo I will watch. Other than that whole cartoon can suck it.
All right. Well, before we get into that, breaking down that bracket, in the 80s, we decided upon Inspector Gadget versus He-Man, Transformers versus Thundercats, Snorks versus Smurfs, Alvin and the Chipmunks versus Muppet Babies. Now, I believe that you had actually picked all of those. Am I correct? Like all of those made your list?
Every single one of those made my list, yeah.
The only one that made my list that actually didn't make the final list was Care Bears. And the reason why I just dropped Care Bears off was because ultimately we agree upon all of those brackets. I didn't see any like you actually brought up Muppet Babies that wasn't on mine. And I thought, wow, I really like Muppet Babies, or at least I did really like Muppet Babies. So I was able to just drop off Care Bears because I think in the ranking system, I prefer Muppet Babies over Care Bears. Was there any that you were going to choose that didn't make your list?
Yeah, Garfield and Friends.
See, I
Garfield. Used to love Garfield and Friends. And the problem I was running into too, and you know how technical I get, B-word, is the fact like technically, like if you look on paper, TMNT, the Ninja Turtles, which is in another bracket, is an 80s cartoon. Because it came out in the 80s.
Sure.
However, you made a very good, valid point. We will bring this up since we're doing this, is that you watched it in the 90s mainly when you were a kid as a 90s kid, right? Like Garfield and Friends is sort of one of those ones that skirts the line too. The other one was Heathcliff.
But Heathcliff and Marmaduke.
They're just not good enough to make the list. Let's just be honest with ourselves. If you put them in there, they're getting fucking destroyed.
I think that Heathcliff and Garfield would have had a hell of a battle if they went head to head, but I don't think that they would have made like the finals, if that makes sense. So
no, because I
agree
will commend
with you,
B-word. I'll commend you that you made these matchups perfect. Like I gave you a list and you gave me a list and we came up with them, but then you like built the bracket and called me and said, hey, I have a bracket. What do you think? And you know, it's not that you took over or I took over total control, but when I saw it, I was like, wow, all these matchups make sense.
They
like
do.
Alvin and the Chipmunks versus the Muppet Babies makes sense because it's like cartoons. Smurfs versus Snorks makes sense. It sort of went in line with my theory of two. So yeah, if you would have had Heathcliff, you would have had to have Garfield because it would have been the battle of the orange tabbies, right?
Well, orange versus yellow, but yes.
Whatever. They're both orange.
I mean, it's shades, right? So one's a lemon, one's a mango. Anyway, so yeah, and we'll get into the bracket setup here shortly. But you're correct on that, and I've got a reason for that we'll get into. So in the 90s, we ended up coming up with Rugrats versus Doug, Ren and Stimpy versus The Simpsons, X-Men versus Batman, and Gargoyles versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, I had more I had one in the 90s that didn't make the list of my finalized list. However, I probably could have picked another 6 or 7 cartoons to add to the list. My one that I was going to pick in the 90s was Beavis and Butthead. And I left that off because you had actually brought Gargoyles to the table. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, Gargoyles seems a bit more appropriate than Beavis and Butthead. My thought process is that The Simpsons and Beavis and Butthead were kind of similar because they both handled more adult content. But I think from a matchup perspective, that Gargoyles needed to be in there as opposed to Beavis and Butthead. There were a couple of cartoons that I ended up not putting in the list, namely Rocko's Modern Life, Ghostbusters, and Darkwing Duck. Those were the 3 that I had a really hard time leaving off my list, but those were the 3 that were left off. What cartoons in the 90s did you potentially leave off and why?
See, this was the hardest bracket for me to build with you. Now, mind you, and just to pull the curtain back, you mainly picked 70s and 90s, and I mainly picked 80s and 2000s. And the other reason behind that was, I still watch cartoons, and you were like, at that point, I've moved on, Jake. So right. 2000s you can handle. But the thing was the 90s, that's where we grew up, right? So, of course, that's going to be our wheelhouse. So, like, I had a problem mainly because I put Gargoyles in there because, and I loved that cartoon, right? But also, we didn't really have any Disney cartoon at all on this list.
And candidly, when we came up with the idea of Cartoon Madness bracket, I almost thought that we do like Nickelodeon versus Disney. Mm-hmm. But as I was looking at that, it didn't make a whole lot of sense because there's in the 90s specifically, it seemed like a lot of the Disney cartoons were geared toward being younger than us. Mm-hmm. And that's where I struggled. Whereas Nickelodeon took that and just ran with it as far as keeping the demographic.
See, and I would have done Nickelodeon versus Cartoon Network because that's where I really stood. Like, sure. These cartoons like really balanced out against each other, right? But like Darkwing Duck, DuckTales,
yeah.
Rescue Rangers was up
Chip
there.
And Dale.
Gummy Bears.
Never watched Gummy Bears.
I love the Gummy Bears. And see, you said Ghostbusters, and see, Ghostbusters to me would have been 80s cartoons. So I think that was another thing. We had a few of those. Like one that I loved, like there's a bunch that I loved. I loved Eek the Cat.
Never seen that.
And see, that's like my theory of too, like our generation's Heathcliff, right? The Tick, I love that on Fox Mornings, but it's not big enough of a cartoon to do. The biggest regret for me of not putting one on there was Spider-Man. I think the Spider-Man cartoon was one of the most transcending, one of them cartoons, because I mean, I watch that now with my daughter Adeline, and she fucking loves it.
And I think the reason why we left Spider-Man off of there is because we had already had X-Men and Batman, the animated series, on there. And I think if we're talking about ranking those 3, and let me know if we're incorrect here, my assumption is that I think we both thought that Batman, the animated series, and X-Men were a more quality cartoon than Spider-Man. Nothing against Spider-Man, but I think head-to-head Spider-Man would have lost to either one of those two. Are we correct there?
I think Spider-Man loses to Batman. I think it's close with X-Men. And not that because I would rank them Batman number 1, X-Men number 2, and then Spider-Man number 3. So I agree with that part. But I think also when we were building the bracket, sort of like when you said Ren and Stimpy versus The Simpsons, it makes sense, right? X-Men versus Batman makes sense. Spider-Man versus TMT doesn't really make sense to me as much. You know what I mean? Like Gargoyles does. It's teams versus teams, right? And I think that's sort of the route we were trying to go to. Like, okay, when you're sitting down and you're thinking, what am I gonna watch between X-Men or Batman? Shit, that's really hard, right? So right. If you pull one of them out and put Spider-Man there, it makes sense. But if you go, who am I gonna watch, The Simpsons or Spider-Man? The bracket's gonna be so skewed against the other one because it really depends on the type of audience you have, right? Like, well, I watch The Simpsons or I watch, And we saw some of these where when we were looking at votes, I was surprised some of the times with the fans. But then there's also times like I'll say this: I thought Inspector Gadget was the dark horse, and seeing him kick the shit out of He-Man was fucking great.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into some of these matchups here in a minute. We've got one final bracket to kind of discuss here. So again, keeping with the list that we sent to each other, we ended up with Batman Beyond versus the Powerpuff Girls, which I think is a good matchup. Kim Possible versus Invader Zim, which damn near wasn't decided at the end of the polls. Ed, and Eddie versus Cat Dog, and then SpongeBob versus Dexter's Lab, which is really interesting as we get into the rounds to discuss how they broke down. But some of them that I left off my list, going with your suggestions here, and again because you watched more cartoons in this genre than I did, or this decade than I did. I had the Boondocks. I had Avatar: The Last Airbender. I had Family Guy, Futurama, and Jimmy Neutron. There were a few that I left off because I just didn't know how they would fit, and that would be King of the Hill. And I forget what the other two were. But there was three of them that didn't make the list. And there's Johnny Bravo, Space Ghost. But I think that one was where I was confused because I think that fell more into 90s than it did the 2000s. Even though I watched Space Ghost more in the 2000s than I did the 90s, and same thing with Johnny Bravo. But I think that those two fell in the 90s more than the 2000s. Which ones did you have that didn't make your list? Because we ended up going with your list for that final bracket.
It was a lot like from the Cartoon Network Nickelodeon era, and you can tell that by a lot of these picks, right? Samurai Jack was one of them. Due to art style being against Powerpuff Girls, I thought it would have been great. Like a lot of your picks, like I remember you sent them to me, and I just didn't go with them because a lot of them were more adult content.
Yeah.
Not that I have anything against that, but I was like, that's a whole bracket on its own, right? Like Simpsons, Futurama, King of the Hill, because King of the Hill came out in 97. So I was also in that quandary of, do I rank it as a 90s cartoon? Because I remember watching it in the 90s, and then when I got older, I didn't really.
Right.
But I Am Weasel on Cartoon Network. Courage the Cowardly Dog was one that was really hard for me to not have on the list. I loved that cartoon, and I think if we would have switched out SpongeBob or Dexter's Lab, it would have made sense, or maybe even Ed, and Eddie versus Cat Dog. But again, these sort of all made sense to each other based on, you look at this bracket, essentially besides one pick on there, this is Nickelodeon versus Cartoon Network to a T.
Right.
I mean, Kim Possible's Disney and Batman Beyond was WB, but besides that, you had almost this whole bracket of those, and those two channels were king during this time, so that made sense. There could have been a lot on there. I think, like when I say I Am Weasel, people probably don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, right? It's like, and so why do I put it on there then? Like people that were cartoon watchers like me be like, oh fuck yeah, and then do you get into the Toonami stuff? Like Dragon Ball Z and that. And then again, that's a whole nother genre that you're trying to fit in there. And I would love to fit it in there, but it's also, you don't want results when you make a bracket to be so skewed. Like even though we are going to break this down, sometimes there were votes that it was like, holy shit, how is they winning by that much? But you get what I mean? Like we were trying to put like items against each other to make this tough. Cause I will tell you this too, and I'm sure you got it. I know we got some in the DMs, but I also got a lot of text messages like, fuck you guys, this is hard.
Yeah. No, there was quite a bit of feedback on trying to do this. And that kind of goes into how I set up the bracket, because I knew that we could spend a lot of conversation talking about, okay, why Looney Tunes as an example is better than Schoolhouse Rock, right? But I wanted to try to get cartoons that had similar properties together, specifically for the first round. The second round, it just so happened that some of these matched up better than others, but it wasn't necessarily designed that way. So as we go into the first round, we had Fat Albert versus Scooby-Doo. Now, I'm a huge fan of Fat Albert. I really liked the cartoon. I actually liked the movie with Kenan Thompson that came out. I thought it was good. But Scooby-Doo knocked they just completely schooled them at 87% to 13% on our Instagram poll. On our Twitter poll, it was also skewed, like it wasn't even close. So I mean, that one was just, they mopped the floor with it. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, I Do you think anything with Cosby had to do anything to do with that?
I do. And it was funny because we had actually had a comment on our Twitter poll with Fat Albert versus Scooby Doo, and they had said, "How could anybody vote for Fat Albert considering Bill Cosby?" And I just responded with a Bill Cosby gif. It was pretty funny. It got a pretty good reaction, but I do think Cosby had to do with that. So just so you know, the percentage on our Twitter for that particular matchup was 69% Scooby Doo, 31% Fat Albert. So it actually got more love on Twitter than it did on Instagram. But to go into the next one, Looney Tunes versus Tom and Jerry, this one was a good matchup. And actually, to me, it was I think it was a little skewed. I would have had a hard time picking between these two. So Tom and Jerry on our Instagram poll ended up with 36% against Looney Tunes at 64%. And likewise on Twitter, it was 70% for Looney Tunes and 30% for Tom and Jerry. What are your thoughts on that?
Recognizability ones. Everybody, remembers Looney Tunes more. Not that Tom and Jerry aren't noticeable, but one, they just came out with that really shitty film. I don't know if you watched it.
No.
But it was so bad. I watched it with my daughter, of course, and it was one of the worst movies I've seen in a while. But see, I would go Tom and Jerry. I'm just a huge Tom and Jerry fan.
I am too.
I like that simplistic type of cartoon too, of no talking, just beat the crap out of each other and try to get through. And like it's almost like reminds me of Coyote versus the Roadrunner.
But I was just going to say that. Yeah. I think if you were to take Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, and if they had their own cartoon and you match it up with Tom and Jerry, that would be a hard one to pick between.
Yeah, I think Tom and Jerry wins that. However, when you have the whole Looney Tunes live up, which was great, because I mean, you even remember when we were kids, like you had that. I'm sure you had that stupid fucking cowboy shirt where Taz was Emmett.
Oh yeah,
and
Bugs, of course.
Yeah. See, and Bugs Bunny was Troy Aikman, and I don't know who was fucking Michael Irvin Rooster or some bullshit.
I think it was
but
Daffy.
You know what I mean? Like they were a staple. I mean, Taz was probably one of the biggest characters growing up. Because, I mean, he had his own cartoon, Tasmania. And Warner Brothers has stood the test of time. I mean, Looney Tunes has been able to go into every decade and knock it out. So it wasn't surprising that they won. However, I still would go with Tom and Jerry for me. But I totally understand why the fans did, and it makes sense.
Right. I agree with you there. My vote was for Tom and Jerry. And full disclosure, you and I voted on all of these, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So the next matchup that we had, I thought this one was actually going to be, this one is closer, but I didn't realize how close it wasn't, if that makes sense. So Flintstones and the Jetsons. First off, one of my favorite movies is The Jetsons Meet the Flintstones. That was amazing. I absolutely love to see that they were intertwined that way. On our Twitter poll, the Flintstones won 57% to the Jetsons 43%. And then on our Instagram poll, the Flintstones won 64% to the Jetsons 36%. So both of those are kind of close as far as the votes go from our tallies. Did you see the Flintstones taking the cake on that?
I did. And I'm a Jetson fan. Like I love the Jetsons movie. Just their movie over the Flintstones Jetson movie. But cartoon wise, I love the Flintstones more. And maybe it's because I'm a big dinosaur nerd. But I just liked that cartoon. And it was funny. I actually called my mama to ask her a question on this one. And she just laughed and goes, "Who the fuck's gonna pick the Jetsons?" And I went, "Mom." She's like, "Really? Like people like that shit?" And I'm just like, that made total sense for somebody from the that decade to say.
Right.
I just saw the Flintstones thing, and I think that goes with recognizability. Not that people don't recognize the Jetsons, but
right.
You also if you look up this, like if we were gonna call them stats, right? The Jetsons. How long do you think they actually were on the air, B-Word?
Probably 5 years.
Yeah, the 2 seasons, I think.
Oh, was it 2 seasons?
I'm going to look it up now. I'm hoping I'm not wrong. But it's one of those ones, like, you look at it and you're thinking, okay, like, they had a long run. They were a great, 2 seasons. They did 2 seasons. And technically, if we're going to be assholes, they were in the 60s. But it doesn't, when you look at the bracket, right, and you know that cartoon, and you know everything about, like, what we're building on here, you'd think that cartoon would have lasted a lot longer, right?
Right.
And then you go, wow, they were only on for 2 seasons. Why?
Yeah, I agree with you there. So let's finish out this decade here, and then let's move on. So we've got Schoolhouse Rock versus the Pink Panther. Honestly, I wasn't too excited about this matchup. Schoolhouse Rock was kind of a staple for after school and Saturday morning cartoons. It garnered a lot of attention because it was educational. Schoolhouse Rock and Fat Albert may have been a better matchup, candidly. But we paired it up with the Pink Panther, and the Pink Panther won by a landslide. It wasn't even close, at least on our Instagram poll. So it was 74% to 26%. On Twitter, however, it was our closest matchup. Did you know that? So
Yeah,
it's 56% Pink Panther and 44% Schoolhouse Rock. So, very close on that one. So to transition over to the 80s, we had Inspector Gadget versus He-Man. I think you said it best. I think Inspector Gadget was a dark horse in this one. I don't know that either one of us predicted the success, considering how close Inspector Gadget was with He-Man on Twitter at 53%, 47%. But as we got into our Instagram, it was 69%, 31%. What about Inspector Gadget do you think is more appealing than He-Man?
The song.
And how does the song go?
Inspector Gadget. Like, everybody remembers that stupid thing when they were like, that might as well just been the cartoon you were walking by and you remember that song. And a lot of these cartoons have great songs, right?
Right.
But I think that was part of it. I mean, I was a huge He-Man person, and I also liked She-Ra, the girl side of it. But I watched Inspector Gadget a lot growing up as a kid. Hence why I put it on this list. And I was just like, I was surprised, but not. You know what I mean? I honestly thought He-Man was going to get way more votes than did. I thought it was going to be closer. And then just seeing how Inspector Gadget was doing, I was like, holy crap, there's a lot of fans like me out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Another one that kind of wiped the floor was the Smurfs over the Snorks.
That sucks. That sucks.
And I think the reason why is because Smurfs were more popular than the Snorks. But you're a diehard Snorks fan. So
I'm a huge Snorks fan. That's the theory too. I love the Snorks. I love the underwater adventures. They make way more sense. It's a lot better of a cartoon. And my favorite part was, you know how I knew they'd lost or they would lose? Is I looked at my wife and said the bracket, and she just goes, "What the fuck's a Snork?"
Yep, that's it. And I think that's when people were going through here, and they were voting for familiarity, and that's when the Smurfs won on that one, and the Snorks lost. Alvin and the Chipmunks and Muppet Babies. This one was interesting. This one was really interesting because on Twitter, Alvin and the Chipmunks won 52% to 48%. On Instagram, Muppet Babies won 52% to 48%. And we had to actually break down the amount of votes, and the difference between Alvin and the Chipmunks winning over Muppet Babies was 1 vote. That was the closest matchup, I want to say, between maybe 1 or 2 decades that we had between a matchup. And this was an ideal matchup if you want to talk about the 2 cartoons.
The difference is, though, too, I don't think either one of these has diehard fans.
No.
So like you look at it, right? There's people like me that are diehard Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans.
Yeah.
There are not, you don't go around. I mean, I'm sure there are, because there is that documentary Bronies about, the My Little Pony guys that love it way too much. I'm sure there are huge fans of gummy bears, right? We were talking about that cartoon earlier. But there's people out there that really love the Muppet Babies, but I don't think it's as divisive. I think that's more one of a click pick, like, okay, I like this one more than that one, or I think people put into other aspects, like, okay, did I like the Alvin and the Chipmunks holiday record? Yeah, I'm probably going to vote for them then. I also think, though, too, I will say this, out of votes, it was one of the ones that got skipped over the most.
Yes, it did.
So I will say that was one thing I noticed, and I actually talked to people about that, because I would see, because you could see who voted, and I would be like, hey man, you didn't vote for that one. Yeah, I don't have a fucking opinion on that. And it was funny, the older crowd that voted, I noticed they didn't, because just like I think, real life, that if they're not educated on it, why would they, right?
Right.
But I'm the type of person, I'll just vote anything. Like sometimes I'll look at it and go, I don't really know. Like if Beavis and Butthead were on here, I've never seen it, right? But I'd be like, I'd vote one way or the other regardless, right?
Right.
Of how I feel. So that it didn't surprise me either, noticing how many times people skipped over that one.
Right.
So, I mean, it was a good matchup, though.
To close out the 80s, we did have Transformers and Thundercats, which candidly I thought was going to be a lot closer than it was. 57% Transformers on Twitter, and then on Instagram it was 66% for Transformers on Twitter, or I'm sorry, on Instagram. So not nearly as close as I imagined. It was a good. That one actually had good participation and votes on both platforms, though, so that was really good. Let's move on to the 90s here real quick. We've got Rugrats and Doug. This one we didn't know who was going to win this one initially. It was tied up on both platforms for a while. Rugrats ended up winning on Twitter 53% to 47%. And then on Instagram, Rugrats cleaned the floor with Doug. It was 71%, 29%. So
good.
Almost wasn't even close. That one actually bothers me because I think Doug is my favorite cartoon from the 90s. So
are you for real?
Yeah, I love Doug Funny, Patty
The
Mayonnaise,
Ryan Gosling
Skeeter.
of cartoons?
Oh, absolutely, dude. His dog Pork Chop, the whole works, dude. I would totally get a Quail Man tattoo. So the next bracket, Ren and Stimpy versus The Simpsons. I didn't really know how this would go. I mean, both cartoons are popular. The Simpsons ended up winning on Instagram 57%, 43%. On Twitter, they ended up winning 60% to 40%. And so I think The Simpsons was the brand in there. And so that's what kind of made them go forward that way. Did you think that The Simpsons were going to win?
Yeah. Just like South Park, Simpsons did it. You know, like Simpsons did everything. You know, it's a staple in a household. You don't even have to watch it to know it. I think you could put Ren and Stimpy in front of a lot of people and they would be like, yeah, whatever. But I think the Simpsons have a bigger appeal and pull. Right. Like I remember I used to watch it on Thursday nights at 8 p.m., you know, with my family. That's what we did. And so I think it has that. I mean, it's still on the air, B-word. I mean, they're still fucking going.
And that's that arguably, and we're going to get into which cartoon's the best, but arguably they've got a whole set of momentum behind them in this contest. So the next one, X-Men versus Batman. Batman the Animated Series took that one. It was close. On Twitter, they won that one with 53%, and on Instagram, they ended up winning that one 63%. I think Batman the Animated Series, candidly, is the better of the two. That one really didn't surprise me. I think you're in agreement on that one too, correct?
Yeah, I think Batman the Animated Series is one of the greatest cartoons ever made.
Yeah.
There's an amazing documentary too, just to say, on YouTube. And I've sent it to you before. I think it's called In the Heart of Batman or something, but it is totally recommend watching it, just seeing the behind the scenes of like what went into that cartoon and everything. So it didn't surprise me that it beat X-Men. I did expect that one to be close.
Yeah.
But I thought Batman would pull it out, and of course it happened.
Right. Final matchup in the 90s, Gargoyles and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Gargoyles didn't even show up to the fight, dude.
No.
On Twitter, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles won 86%. On Instagram, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles won 89%. Wasn't even close. I think we can kind of expect that, but with that matchup. But again, like Items, it was a good matchup. I don't regret that one. I am curious a little bit though, if we would have put Spider-Man against TMNT, how that one would have turned out. But overall, pretty good. So
yeah, I'm also happy Gargoyles because there was a typo. So sorry everybody on our bracket that it's Gargoyles.
And
I'm happy that they didn't. So we didn't, have them keep going, and somebody else called it out to me because that happened today.
Oh, very good. Well, I'm really happy that neither one of us can spell. So to go into the 2000s, we had Batman Beyond versus Powerpuff Girls. This one went back and forth. I didn't know how this one was going to end, but it ended up, I don't know how, but somehow Twitter took this one over, and 84% Batman Beyond. And then on Instagram, this one was tied for a long time, and Batman squeaked it out with 51%. I think both of us would probably assume that Batman Beyond would win against Powerpuff Girls, but good matchup nonetheless. The next matchup, you were pretty partial on this one. So it's Kim Possible versus Invader Zim. This was another one that came right down to the wire. This one was actually crazy how close it was. On Twitter, it tied 50% for both properties. But on Instagram, Kim Possible took it with 64%, and we didn't have to do any tie breaks on that one. So what's your thought on Kim Possible beating Invader Zim there?
I was amazed. I mean, I'm a huge, so just like you said, Doug, I'm a huge Invader Zim fan. And the whole, I love that cartoon. And so I think I was just more impartial to that. I could watch that over and over again. My wife, was like, well, I voted Kim Possible because, I was told once I looked like her, and I'm just like, whatever. Like, it just hurt my heart. Because, I mean, I like Kim Possible. Don't get me wrong. I like the Naked Mole Rat. I like the whole theme song. I just was expecting Invader Zim to do better.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We've got two more in the 2000s, and that closes out our round one. We've got Ed, and Eddie versus Cat Dog. This one I didn't have a preference. I didn't really have a dog in the fight. Ed, and Eddie ended up taking it. They weren't even close on Twitter. 66%, and then on Instagram, Ed, and Eddie actually took it 58% against Cat Dog. So a little closer on Instagram than on Twitter. Was that kind of what you expected to?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're in one or the other. I mean, I loved Cat Dog. It was a fun cartoon, but I knew Ed, and Eddie would take it away. So that wasn't a surprise at all. And then to finally close this out, I mean, SpongeBob versus Dexter's Lab. I'm just going to be up front here, B-word, before you give numbers or whatever. I don't know if you're gonna. Dexter's Lab was going to wipe the floor because I don't think it was the fact that people like Dexter's Lab more. I think people hate fucking SpongeBob.
Well, and here's the thing: this was the closest matchup of this almost the closest matchup of this one. So this Dexter's Lab on Twitter ended up winning 54%. And on Instagram, it was tied. It was 50-50. And so thank goodness we didn't have to do tie breaks on that. I prefer Dexter's Lab over SpongeBob anyway. So I was pretty happy with that. But
I fucking love SpongeBob. I don't care, dude. I was hoping for Gary the Snail and all them, but he would lose in the end, I think, anyways. But whatever. That's tomatoes, potatoes.
All right. So let's take a little bit of a break, reset, and we'll be right back.
Hey guys, what's up? This is Mike.
And I'm Tabby, and we are Happy Hour Podcast.
We wanted to come to you on this episode and tell you about the world record we are going to break.
The longest running podcast was 36 hours. We are going to be shooting for 37 hours and or more.
This event will happen on August 26th of this year on our 1-year anniversary.
Via live stream on our Facebook page and a YouTube exclusive.
We've also got some help
keeping us awake and the audience entertained
from awesome podcasting friends like
Tallboy Radio,
Wheel of Horror,
Hub Time Podcast,
Bleach Bros Podcast,
Dad's on Dayquil,
Ryan Leskis of Pain Productions,
Cheap Seat Reviews,
Florida Men on Florida Man,
Matty Ice Media,
Listen Podcast,
Whiskey Hell Podcast,
Derazzled Podcast,
Porn Stash Podcast,
That Damn Podcast,
and Designated Quizzers.
We would love for you to join us.
And maybe bring along some coffee.
See you on August 26th.
Bleach Bros Podcast is proud to align itself with Jerky Pro, a beef jerky manufacturer established by military and paramilitary veterans.
Available in 3-ounce or 1-pound bags with great flavors such as honey glazed, teriyaki, red hot, apple cinnamon, original, peppered, sweet barbecue, and if you're ballsy enough, nuclear.
Be sure to use our promo code to get some of the best jerky on the market. Use Bleach Bros 5, all lowercase, to take advantage of this offer today. All right, welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and just cover the second round of our Cartoon Madness bracket. So Jake, going back to the 70s, we had Scooby-Doo versus Looney Tunes, with Looney Tunes taking the cake on that one. We had the Flintstones versus Pink Panther, and the Flintstones won that one. I wasn't surprised by either of those two. Were you?
No. My favorite was that I was actually talking to some of our friends because, we have a lot of our sportscast friends too that jump into this stuff. And one of them was like, how did you rank Pink Panther number 2?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we're not doing seed because they're like thinking it's like actual March Madness, like, Dexter or, Batman Beyond's our number 1 seed. I'm like, no, guys, there's no seeds. This is just where we put them, being up front. No, none of those surprised me. Just like if we go to the 80s, Alvin and the Chipmunks versus the Smurfs. I mean, maybe I'm a little surprised Alvin Chipmunks did beat the Smurfs. You know, maybe the little blue guys. You know,
I was actually a
would have
little
got more votes.
surprised on that. Yeah, but it doesn't shock me that Alvin and the Chipmunks won, though.
No, because I mean, some of these though too, I'm like, yeah, they're gonna win that round and then be fucking out anyways. So
Right. Well, so in the 80s, we actually had Inspector Gadget versus Transformers, and I know that we hinted to it before. But Inspector Gadget is kind of a dark horse, and they ended up beating Transformers. What are your thoughts on that?
I was fucking surprised, and I mean, I am and I'm not, because I called it when I told you from the beginning. I think a lot of people are going to vote Inspector Gadget. I don't know why I have this fucking feeling, and I think since Thundercats and Transformers were so close, and I think I have that nostalgia of going. Everybody loves the Transformers, but the more I get older, the more I realize no, not a lot of people were big Transformers fans. Like the only other cartoon, that got brought up a lot was G.I. Joe. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't a G.I. Joe fan. I don't know if you are. I know they're not on the list, but that's an 80s cartoon. And I was thinking like, I had to really think about it again going, yeah, there's a lot of people that aren't really Transformers fans out there. So at that point I was like, we're talking about average Saturday morning cartoon people. More people are going to watch Inspector Gadget. So I would, the dark horse destroyed again. So that was great.
Yeah, it was pretty lopsided on that one. In the 90s, we had Rugrats versus The Simpsons. We highlighted The Simpsons in our breakdown of the last round. I know that there were some people that were really partial to the Rugrats winning, but The Simpsons pulled it out on that one. I was more of a fan of the Rugrats than The Simpsons, so that one kind of broke my heart a little bit there. But Batman versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What did you see on this one?
The toughest matchup on the whole fucking bracket.
Right.
I mean, I love the team. It was one of those things we talked about it in the background because we shared who we voted for because we knew we would see it.
Right.
And I was just like, I voted Turtles, but I was sitting there going, do I have regrets? Like, did I marry the wrong one with Batman or TMNT? You know what I mean? Like, did I hitch my horse to the wrong wagon? But in the end, you know how much of a Ninja Turtle fan I am, so it wouldn't make sense if I didn't vote that way. But that was so fucking hard. And I think that was hard for everybody. That was the one I got most of. You guys are assholes.
Yeah, there was a lot of feedback on that one. I voted for Batman, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, man, the good thing is that none of these were like, 1 or 2 votes. These were, 30 plus votes a lot of the times for these brackets. So Ed, and Eddie versus Dexter's Lab. I know I skipped over Batman Beyond versus Kim Possible, but Ed, and Eddie ended up taking the cake on that one. Again, I didn't really have a horse in the race on this one. What were your thoughts on this one in particular? Did it kind of work out how you thought?
I thought when I saw it, I thought actually Dexter's Lab was going to win just because I was like, I think more people would, even though I'm a bigger Ed, and Eddie fan, but to me, that's also one of those cartoons, like it's almost like a cult classic, like Invader Zim. So I was more afraid that it wouldn't win. But then when it did, we were talking, I was like, yeah, I'm not surprised though, because again, that's one of those ones that people that like cartoons, especially, a lot of our listeners are in our age demographic.
Right.
They'll follow that route with the 2000s. So I was like, yeah. So when it won, okay, it makes sense.
So on this one, just so you know, Ed, and Eddie won by 1 vote total. Against Dexter's Lab. So Batman Beyond versus Kim Possible. I voted for Kim Possible on this one.
You're a loser. What is wrong with you?
Well, so there was a girl when I was in high school who looked just like Kim Possible, and I had a huge crush on her. Never made any move or anything like that, but that was my thought process. I was like, okay, let's vote with my dick and then go from there. So Batman Beyond, though, great cartoon, took the cake. What are your thoughts?
I voted with my dick too, and the bat signal came out. Batman Beyond's an amazing cartoon. It's a achievement for what they did with that cartoon.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things. A lot of our fans as well, I will call it out, are the comic book nerds like us, and so that didn't surprise me when I saw that matchup. I was like, I think Batman Beyond's just going to wipe the floor with this, but then I was surprised seeing that he didn't just totally wipe the floor.
Yeah,
I mean, it was still a close vote.
It was a lot closer than I thought. So that brings us to our Elite 8. So in the 70s bracket, we've got Looney Tunes versus the Flintstones. In the 80s bracket, we've got Inspector Gadget versus Alvin and the Chipmunks. In the 90s bracket, we've got The Simpsons versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And in the 2000s bracket, we've got Batman Beyond versus Ed, and Eddie. Let's go ahead and start with the 70s. So just so you know, audience, Jake and I don't always agree. So each of us have one vote. However, if we vote, like in this example, if I vote for the Flintstones and he votes for Looney Tunes or vice versa, we're not going to be able to win. And so we do have tiebreak votes. So on the tiebreak vote on the 70s, we do have Angela available who can be a tiebreak for us. So Jake, in the 70s, Looney Tunes versus the Flintstones, which one's better in your opinion?
Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes wins.
Well, we agree on that one. So Looney Tunes is going to go to be the best in the 70s. What's your reasoning behind Looney Tunes?
Recognizability. I would rather watch it. I think it's a powerhouse. I think our fans would appreciate if I said that too. Like, you know what I mean? Because for those following along at home, if you are playing our bracket challenge, we are having a contest. If you filled it out and it's there, you are winning so far. We are going to be giving away some merch. So that will be, I think I'm not just going with what people would pick, but I think also like it makes sense. It's a better pick.
I'm looking at I'm looking at a couple things. First off, Looney Tunes was not even close on any category. It just swept the floor with all of its competition. But I do think recognizability is there. As we discussed, you can take Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. You can take Bugs Bunny and Daffy and Tasmanian Devil. They've got so many that are in there wrapped into the Looney Tunes that I think it's really hard to actually say this is better, that's better, whatever, than Looney Tunes. I think Looney Tunes takes the cake without issue. So that's the vote. So with that,
who's your favorite Looney Tune?
Tasmanian Devil.
Really?
Yeah.
You're a Taz guy?
I've always been a Taz guy, and I don't know why, but I've always been a Taz guy. I had Taz shirts. I had Taz merch. There was a point in time where on my very first car, my Chevy El Camino that I had, my dad actually painted Tasmanian Devil on the hood. You may remember that.
I do.
And so Tasmanian Devil has always been my favorite one there.
Who do you think mine is? I knew this would be hard for you.
I don't know, man. Tweety Bird?
Elmer Fudd.
Oh, okay.
I love me some Elmer Fudd. It's him or Daffy. I love Daffy too. I love
Daffy. Ducks. I really enjoyed how Roger Rabbit incorporated them and really highlighted them in that. So yeah, Looney Tunes they just take the cake, dude. So the good news is we don't have to reach out to a lifeline on the 70s. So
nope.
The 80s, we've got Inspector Gadget and Alvin and the Chipmunks. For this bracket, for the 80s and the 2000s, we have your brother Caleb. And so
my lifeline, yep.
As your lifeline. And so we'll see if we have to contact him or not. As you answered the 70s first, I will answer the 80s first. And I'm going to say Inspector Gadget.
Damn, B-word, so am I.
Really?
He's my dark horse. I called it from day one. I was like, when I put him on there, I was like, I think it's just has the recognizability is going to go through. This is sucking, B-word, that we agree on everything tonight. But I will say this. I will say this. I got my brother's picks earlier just because I had to, because his work schedule. So even if we would have had a tiebreaker, I will tell you he was going Inspector Gadget, and that didn't skew my thought. But if you went that way, Inspector Gadget would have went through.
I think that Inspector Gadget has this weird concept that it's so much more exciting than Alvin and the Chipmunks. Like Alvin and the Chipmunks was very, I don't want to say very plain in the storyline, but kind of how you were talking about how Scooby-Doo has the same storyline all the time. Alvin and the Chipmunks has the same storyline all the time. Whereas Inspector Gadget was always this detective saga, no matter how ridiculous it was. And, as a kid, we would always say like things like go gadget donkey dick. So
I still do. My wife appreciates it.
So that being said, Inspector Gadget is the choice there. Now here's the decade that I think we might have some discussion in.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go into the 90s. We've got The Simpsons and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, before you give me your pick, tell me why The Simpsons should be the choice, and then also tell me why Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles should be the choice.
The Simpsons should be the choice because 1, they're still on the air. 2, they've covered everything. 3, their fan following is huge. They've done a great job surviving. It's a great cartoon all around, to be honest. The reason it shouldn't make it through is because at some point you get lost with it, right? It's gone on for so long where, like, I remember the year I stopped watching The Simpsons and I've never been back. I'll watch old reruns every now and then, but it's on Disney Plus. I still don't throw it on. Ninja Turtles should make it through because their fan following is huge. It is an icon. It is an icon, B-word, of its decade. Okay, the difference is the Simpsons are an icon for a cartoon. The Ninja Turtles are an icon for a decade. For this, because we're talking about the original two. We're not talking about the new age Nickelodeon ones that they own it, or all the other iterations that came out. I mean, I remember the 2003 one or 2002 one when it came out when I was in high school. And I bought all those original toys, and I thought it was going to be the greatest show to come back ever, and it wasn't. But TMNT is a decade-defining show.
Okay.
And so for me, TMNT wins this.
So I'm going to tell you why The Simpsons, and then I'm also going to tell you why Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And so The Simpsons, I think, is iconic. Matt Groening, is that how you pronounce his last name?
Matt Groening,
the artist.
Yeah.
He brought in a new style of cartoon that I think has transcended a little bit of cartoons. There's a huge character base in The Simpsons. It's obviously lasted for a long time. It predicts the future. Just so you know. So like it said that Trump was going to win president, and it also said that, Joe Rogan was going to do mushrooms. So I think that that's a good reason why it should win. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles should win because how do you get a better foursome than Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, and Leonardo? And then you add in Splinter, and then you also add in Shredder and Bebop and Rocksteady, and you just don't get a better cast than that. I do agree with you that I think the runtime on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles could impact its winnability here, but I am going to choose The Simpsons.
Okay.
So in this bracket, we do have a lifeline. And I have reached out to Angela, and she says Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
There it is, buddy.
So Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles takes it for the 90s.
You know what's sad?
What's that?
That when you were giving that speech, I was going, I fucking voted for the wrong one. Because all I thought is, I brought up all the other iterations, and The Simpsons never needed to redo themselves into a different relaunching.
Yeah.
Fuck, but I'm sticking with TMNT.
Well, yeah, and it's already voted, so it's signed, sealed, delivered. Angela, thank you for your vote on that one. So now we go into the 2000s. So again, this is your bracket here. So explain to me here why Batman Beyond should win and why Ed, and Eddie should win.
Ed, and Eddie should win because it's like a better. There were other cartoons like it, like Recess and stuff. You remember those? Great cast, great stories, and it's a cult classic. So the people that like it really like it, right? Batman Beyond should win because it's one of the only cartoons, just sort of like when they created Harley Quinn in the Batman series, that was created as a cartoon, not a comic book first. That's a comic book based character, right? They have movies. They've done well. It's hard, but it's not for me. And the fanboy of me is going to really show because I'm going to pick Batman Beyond based on I can still watch that now to this day and love it. I can't say the same about Ed, and Eddie. I can't sit down and watch that show and feel the same way I did. I still feel the same way I did day one watching Batman Beyond.
I think Batman Beyond should win. And it will have my vote, so we're not going to disagree on this one. But I think it should win because the storylines were better. The lore that comes with Batman Beyond and the want for Batman Beyond to become live action is so so passionate for fanboys that I don't think that Ed, and Eddie had a chance. I think if Dexter's Lab would have won, I like Dexter's Lab better than Ed, and Eddie, candidly. And I liked watching Dexter's Lab more than I did Batman Beyond, even though Batman Beyond was a good cartoon. Batman Beyond versus Ed, and Eddie head to head, it's Batman Beyond.
My favorite is my brother, my Lifeline vote. I did not know this about my brother until after I asked. He is one of the only people, or the only person I've ever met on this planet that hates Batman Beyond. He went on a 20-minute tirade, and I think the hater gene runs in the family, of how stupid, dumb, and god-awful Batman Beyond the cartoon is. And hearing him go off was probably one of the funniest things I've ever heard.
You called me last night and you said that, that he was so passionate about how he hated Batman Beyond that you were actually laughing hysterically.
Dude, it was just like, he's like so skinny and he's young and his girlfriend's sucking the villains. Who are the villains? They're all reduns. And I'm like, you watched the cartoon? And he goes, I didn't like it. I watched it because I was sitting next to you and you're over there. I really like Batman Beyond. So thank you, Caleb. And it did not skew my vote because, of course, I was the one sitting there. I love Batman Beyond. But B-word, this brings us to the final.
The final four.
Right?
Yep.
Who do you have out of Looney Tunes versus TMNT?
This one's hard because I like TMNT. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is very important to my childhood. Again, like I talked about, I think Bebop and Rocksteady, I always wish for them to be in the live action shows or the live action movies, and they kind of did it, but they didn't. With whatever those guys were in the first one when they came out of the ooze. I don't remember what their names were, but they just
Toka and Razor.
Yeah, there you go.
That was due to copyright agreements, just heads up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, didn't know that. But so I would like to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles win. I don't think I can vote for them though. I think Looney Tunes is going to be my vote. The reason why Looney Tunes is going to be my vote is because there's such a huge cast and there's so many notable characters that I don't know that we can, as you're flipping me off, I don't know that we can choose another one, but apparently we have your vote.
Looney Tunes.
For your vote is Looney Tunes?
Yeah, I hate that we agree. That's why I'm mad. It's not because we're going to argue. No, it's just because this is becoming too easy. It's like writing chalk. It stood the test of time. Stood the test of time. It's great. TMNT's good, but there are some parts of it that you're like, I don't know. I mean, there might be some Looney Tune, like, you know how they always did like the little side stories or whatever, that you might be like, I don't want to watch that one. But it never felt like too cheesy or too bad.
Well, so in preparation of us having a disagreement, I reached out to Angela, and her vote is Looney Tunes. Yeah. So it is 3-0 Looney Tunes. So that is our winner of the 70s versus the 90s is Looney Tunes. So that brings us to the 80s versus the 2000s. And so, Jake, we've got Inspector Gadget versus Batman Beyond. Talk to me a little bit about why each one should win.
I can't give you reasons why each one should win, so I'm just going to say Inspector Gadget will win this.
Really?
It's not because I wanted to call the dark horse thing, but I think I got skewed when I was talking to my brother last night and hearing that there are people in the world that aren't as much of a fanboy as me with everything in life. Like, it's like when I took him to see the Batman, it was sort of funny. He's like, yeah, Batman's in it. Cool. I'll go. Like, he's not like, I don't know how we are so opposites with certain things. And I think Inspector Gadget people would know that song over Batman Beyond. People can recognize that character more. I think people could sit down and watch that more so than Batman Beyond.
Okay.
So Inspector Gadget would win.
Inspector Gadget would win. Okay. So I struggle, dude. I struggle with this one a lot. I have already locked in my vote, so I will not be changing my mind here. I did that as soon as I wrote down who the winners were, so I can't go back on that.
Right.
Inspector Gadget, such a good show. Is his niece Penny? Is that what his niece's name?
I think so. And the dog, I don't remember. Yeah.
I don't remember what the dog's name is, but great characters, great storylines, great gadgets. It was always fascinating when he go gadget, whatever it was.
Donkey
and
Donk.
It just happened. Yeah, Donkey Dick. Batman Beyond, man, I love Batman Beyond. I really do. I think it's one of the most incredible Batman storylines, period. I think it's really good. I'd love to see more in the story, but I locked in Inspector Gadget. And the reason why I locked in Inspector Gadget was because, again, when we're talking about cartoons that I watched more, I watched Inspector Gadget more than I did Batman Beyond. And also from a non-fanboy perspective, I do think that Inspector Gadget would win.
Yeah. I'll tell you this too, behind the curtain, this did not change my vote, but expressing how my brother felt already, he said if Batman Beyond happened to beat Ed and Eddie, he should die. And Inspector Gadget will defeat him somehow. So that was his next call. So that would have happened. So even if I would have picked Batman Beyond, not knowing what I do now, because I didn't know your pick, Inspector Gadget would have moved forward because my brother was adamant that he was not going to let that happen, that he would forcefully try to figure this out.
Now, here's the deal. I have Angela on speed dial right now. If we don't agree on the winner, being that your brother is working, she will be the tiebreaker for us in this final round. Okay. So we've got Looney Tunes out of the 70s versus Inspector Gadget out of the 80s. How do you justify this pick? Talk me through it, but then don't make your pick, but talk me through each one of these and tell me why.
You know what sucks, B-word, is I said I hate the 70s and I was more nostalgic to the 90s and 2000s, and neither of them are in this fucking bracket. And I think it's because we made those, and not that we made them, but those brackets were harder for me. So how do you make it through there, right? But just recognizability, lasting, and just people what they really like, right? Everybody knows who the Looney Tunes are. Everybody knows a character voice, a favorite character they have. I mean, Tweety Bird was huge growing up. Bugs Bunny has stood the test of time. Inspector Gadget, great cartoon, great song. It's apparently kicked ass all the way to here somehow. Some way it made it. But I want to give you my pick.
Well, hold on. Before you give me your pick.
I'll wait. All right.
Inspector Gadget, because you talked about Looney Tunes. Inspector Gadget. I can't get over the fact that he had a gadget for everything. He was like Get Smart. Like he was the cartoon version of Get Smart. Like Get Smart had his telephone shoe telephone. Mm-hmm. The only thing that was missing was Agent 99. I needed some hotness in Inspector Gadget. I needed some sort of like Lola Bunny type. Yeah, a booby or a Subi, right? Even though I'm not attracted to cartoons, like that would have been cool because Penny's not my type, different age range than I would want. Looney Tunes, I thought it was great when you had counterparts. So you could have Bugs Bunny versus Daffy. You could have Bugs Bunny versus Elmer Fudd. You could have Taz versus Tweety Bird. Like there was a lot of different storylines where these can go. So you want to give your pick first, or you want me to give my pick first?
I'm going Inspector Gadget.
Oh my God, I'm going Looney Tunes. Hold on.
And because it's stuck in my head now at this point. I just can't get over how much I watched that cartoon, and I don't care. The thing is, I'm the type of person on this show that it can take the hate, and I'm going to get a shit ton for it. But I just see it winning. I see Inspector Gadget winning, and I don't know. It's like, when that, like, I'm that asshole that when you do a March Madness bracket that like circles one team and just goes. I did that from the beginning with this one and said, I feel if it makes it, it's going to make it all the way. And so it's my Cinderella story team. So Inspector Gadget, in my opinion, wins. But
this is your Loyola Chicago, huh? You got some nuns in the stands. Like
I do.
Like this is your team.
Yep.
So I'm picking Looney Tunes, which puts us at a standstill. And I have just reached out to Angela, and she has placed her vote. Angela has come back with Looney Tunes.
Well, of course she did. Ugh.
So, that being said, the ultimate winner of Cartoon Madness Battle of the Decades is Looney Tunes out of the 70s. Jake, how do you feel about that?
A team from the 70s, a cartoon from the 70s has won this challenge. This was a lot of fun. It was fun just to think about cartoons. And the main thing is, I know in the beginning of the episode, everybody, that we did a lot of numbers and we were just talking, but I really hope it made you think too, and sort of go back to that childhood time, because there's some bullshit times out there right now. And I'm not trying to get too serious, but like things that you can remember, like that was great to watch that, or just sit around and do that. Like I went back. It's sort of like when we've done the Everlasting Jukebox on here and we've talked about it, where you go back and you listen to albums again. I went back and watched some cartoons, and it was a blast, and it was fun. It was cool showing it to my kids and getting them into them, and like just going down that lane. Like I fell down the rabbit hole on YouTube the other day, B-Word, and I was watching Mutant League Football, which is a terrible cartoon. But I was watching, you know what I mean? It just, I fell down the cartoon rabbit hole, and I was just enjoying myself. And so I hope our fans had just as much fun as we did. Thank you for all the involvement and all the votes. We got a lot more votes than, just to be honest, than we thought we would. Yeah. There was a ton of interaction.
And as soon as we put out the initial matchups, I mean, it soared. It took off. I think it was actually one of our best Twitter posts. I too want to second what Jake said. Thanks to everybody for taking part in this. Thanks to Caleb and to Angela for helping us with tie breaks. Thank you for everybody who voted, shared, retweeted, got people involved. This was really, really fun. I enjoyed this, and just like Jake, this brought me down memory lane a little bit and had me revisit some of these cartoons. And I even started watching some again that I hadn't watched in a while, like Darkwing Duck, or, some that stand the test of time. And DuckTales, it was just really, really good. And so we can't appreciate our audience enough. We hope that you enjoyed the episode. And with that, Jake, what do you got for us?
Thanks for all the dirty talk. Come back and get sanitized.